What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Playmakers Corner podcast. I'm your host for today, Simon Villanos, aka Coach V, and this is episode 443, being recorded currently on February 15th, about to be February 16th with how late this recording is going to be here. But we are going to bring you more season previews. We got 3 on this one, and so it's going to be a pretty short episode, and I'm only going to be talking about 3 teams, and I don't want to put these squads on blast because the other teams I haven't talked about have not updated their rosters. I know they do play this week on the 21st and 22nd, so hopefully we could get a season preview up by then, but if not, then we're just going to hop into our week 1 recap next week. And just as a reminder, so week 1, we're going to go ahead and do that recap of week 1. So it's a long week 1, but there's a lot of teams that have not played, but we just wanted to wait. And so we're going to do that week 1 recap coming out on, I believe, the 24th. That should be a Monday of February. So just keep that in mind. I know Life and Thomas played today, got some notes on that. Point and Milligan has played as well. And then I know the KCAC is doing a big thing where K-Dub, Ottawa, and Baker all play each other, so and Midland, and so that should be pretty exciting there, and so be on the lookout for that. But on this episode, we're going to talk about these teams, talk about last year, talk about the changes to the roster, additions, departures, also talk about players who got recognized either by us or by their conference, the Sun Conference that is, and then we're going to go ahead and look at their schedule for this year and make some predictions, hopefully. So there you go there. And on this one, like I said, a very short episode. We got 3 teams. We got Warner, Weber, and Florida Memorial, according to our preseason rankings that we've already released. Make sure you check that out at Playmakers Corner on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Or, sorry, Twitter/X, I should say. But right now, Warner in our preseason rankings is at number 4. Weber's at number 8. And then Florida Memorial is at number 19. Now, obviously, we are open to being wrong. But this episode should help give some insight, and all our season preview episodes, make sure you check them out, should give you some insight about why we ranked the teams where we did. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and hop into it. Alright, let's start by talking about number 19, Florida Memorial, at least according to our preseason rankings here. Last season, they had a new head coach. An interim head coach is what I should say there, as they fired Coach Alvarez, which, we'll stand on, was definitely the wrong decision, and I think last season reflected that as they went 1-11. That is the worst they've done since their very first season, where, they really couldn't field a team here and forfeited a bunch of games and went technically 0-2, but them being not 0-11, but 1-11 is pretty bad, and there were a couple close-ish games in this one. Let me start with the close games, right, with the positive first. Against the University of Fort Lauderdale, they only lost 12-20. That's like a 1-score game right there. That is against basically a 2-year college, though. Against Weber, they only lost 30-18. I know they did score a touchdown to make it a little bit closer, but, not completely out of reach. Against Life, if some craziness didn't happen in that game, they probably would have been better off. It might have actually won it, but they lost that one 33-27. That looked like a blowout at halftime even, so there you go. Against Reinhardt, against Reinhardt, they did beat them 18-0, and then against Point, they only lost 6-7, and then St. Thomas at the end, a little rivalry here, they lost 0-14. Just didn't make the most out of their opportunities. So a couple close losses. But other than that, they got blown out in a lot of these games. And they play in a tough conference. Warner, they lost 34-14. Kaiser, they got 50-pieced both times. So there's that. Warner again, 44-0. Thomas, 52-0. So, they're playing tough teams, right? You got to keep that in mind. But, I mean, they ended up 1-11, which is not good. And I think the thing that made this season worse as well is that, I mean, they were just undisciplined. It felt like there were so many unsportsmanlike conduct penalties, like every game. They definitely led the country in those as far as women's college flag football goes. And it was bad. I mean, there were some very bad moments. Go ahead and check out what happened in that life game there. There's some things that probably shouldn't have happened in a lot of different ways. I think that is as vague as I could get right now. And I mean, they made a lot of enemies. We'll just say that as well. So not good at all. And it definitely makes the firing of Coach Alvarez look like even more of an L. So there you go. Especially considering they have a new head coach again going into this year, So that's 3 head coaches in 3 years. And I don't know if this is a permanent fit either. I'm just going to be honest with you as well. So a lot of things to be nervous about. I just want to put that out there. But let's talk about the roster though. Okay, starting with Erica Johnson, last season, despite all that controversy, I mean, she played great, was an all-PMC defensive back for us, was a best DB finalist as well, and I mean, the last 2 years, she had good years, but I think this last year, I mean, we got to watch her a lot more, and I mean, she balled out, she played great football, really on both sides of the ball, but on defense as well. I mean, she just dominated over there, got a bunch of turnovers, and was one of the lone bright spots for that team. So there you go there. Now, other than her, there weren't many players. I mean, there weren't any other players recognized from that squad back in 2024, and we didn't recognize any other players. Now, there is one player I do want to talk about who is still on the roster, who I think is going to do some great things here, and that's Taimalu Santos, the athlete from Panama here. Listed at quarterback, wide receiver, DB. I mean, she's been great the last couple of years, the last, I think, 2 seasons. And going into, I think, now her senior year, it'll be interesting to see what happens, but she's definitely somebody who has kind of served as their wideout 1 and one of their better targets. I mean, opposite of Erica Johnson, who's also very good with the ball in her hand. So you got to keep an eye out for her. You also have great athletes like Oriana Brooks, Josiah Christie, Alexis Nelson, Vanessa Queen, Dejanay Harris, a Diamond Mays, listed at quarterback safety, probably, I would say, is going to get some time at quarterback, either quarterback or wide receiver. She's a great athlete, is all, I mean, you really got to think about there. So gotta love that. So they got some athletes returning, but with all that being said, they are incredibly thin. They only have 11 players listed on the roster, which on any NAIA women's flag football team would be thin, but in the Sun Conference, that is really bad, is what I'm going to say there. And they had a lot of departures. They have 13 departures, and I think only one of them graduated. So 12 departures, which is crazy, and they recruited nobody. And I think they're the only team in the Sun Conference who did not bring in a new player. They might have been the only team in the country who did not bring in a new player, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. And that's not good. I don't know what, the execs, or I don't want to say execs, but directors or coaches are doing up there. I know they had a coaching change, but that's really bad, because you can't lose 12 players, really 13 players, and then not replace any of them at all. That is actually insane here. But even the players they're losing too are going to be incredibly rough to replace anyways. They lose Deja Fanning, who's super underrated, one of the best rushers in the entire country, in my opinion. I mean, they wasted 2 years of her, let's just be honest there. And she's gone now, so that's tough. They lose a great athlete in Amelia Smith, Jennifer Bevel, who is a good corner, Ronisha Gibbs, who is another great athlete, Faith Scott, Perla Baptista, Jada Benaby, Jordan Montgomery, Aaliyah Joyner, Naomi Hudson, Evelyn Uribe, Anaya McKnight, Avion Roll, who was a good athlete, Raina Labor, who was another good player. I mean, a lot of good players, obviously, but they're losing some significant contributors to that team all over, not just one side of the ball, both sides of the ball. And the fact that they do not have any recruits is also just extremely tough. Now, maybe they're just not listed on the roster, right? But it is February 15th when I'm recording this, and they are going to play this week. So we'll see what happens. But, I mean, this is a team that has 2, I think, underclassmen in Jordan Montgomery, the rusher safety from Chandler, Arizona. Also, my bad. I think I accidentally put her on this list of players who was not returning, but she will be returning. And then you have Talia Davis, a sophomore center linebacker rusher from Orlando, Florida. And then the rest, I mean, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of your 11 players, I think, or 7 out of your 11 players are seniors. Then you have 2 sophomores, and then you have 2 juniors. So, I mean, I know we're talking about this season, but looking into the future, a little nervous for this program. A little nervous is all I'm going to say. But like I said, I mean, on the bright side, they got some good athletes, and they got a lot of experience here. You know, you have a lot of versatility, but you do need a new coach, or a coach that can use all of that. And so they have a new one in Clavens Charles, excuse me. I believe he is the DB coach for the boys team. So we'll see what happens there, and was announced as the flag football coach. But it is definitely a little bit of an uphill battle for sure. Especially playing in as tough a conference as the Sun Conference. So it is going to be rough. But, you know, we'll see if these seniors and if these athletes can make something happen. To start, though, I mean, let me just look at their schedule here. So to start, they play Kaiser, which is in Kaiser, by the way. Tough right off the bat. Then they play Barry, which is a D2, but I believe they're playing their club team. So we'll see what happens there. They should be pretty decent, though. So we'll see what happens there. Then they play Weber, who we'll talk about later on in this episode, followed by Villa Maria. That'll be their first home game on March 3rd, I want to say. And then right after that, Battle of Miami Gardens against St. Thomas later that week. Tough game. Then they play Siena Heights. That's a team that, even though they're a first-year program, deeper than they are right now. They play University of Fort Lauderdale. That could be a winnable game. Then they play Warner. I don't think they're going to win that game. Point, maybe a winnable game, but also Point is just way deeper now. Thomas is probably a loss. Reinhardt, I mean, that's a team that I think they could beat, but also, I mean, a lot less deeper now. Same with Life, same deal there, a lot less deeper. St. Thomas again at the end of the season, and then Kaiser. Ooh, Kaiser on their senior day. So there you go. Jeez, they play Kaiser and St. Thomas twice, as well as Warner and Thomas in there. So it is a rough schedule. This is extremely difficult. I mean, they're playing Kaiser, Weber, Warner, and Thomas, and St. Thomas, who are all in the top 10. Warner and Kaiser, I believe. I mean, Kaiser's at 2, Warner at 4, Thomas at 3, St. Thomas at 6, currently in our preseason rankings. That's a really tough schedule. I kind of don't expect them to win those. Then you also play Weber as well, which is a top 10 team. That's rough. Life, Reinhardt, borderline top 10 team. So we'll see what happens there. But I mean, I would probably not be surprised if they didn't win a game. Now, realistically, they could win 1 or 2 games. Maybe 3. If they beat Barry, Villa Maria, Fort Lauderdale. Maybe, I'll say best case scenario 4, right? But, I mean, just playing without that depth, it really limits you as a team because you got to play one way. I mean, you don't have multiple ways to beat other teams. You can't show them different stuff here. And then also, that's so many players playing both ways too. So it's going to be a lot of pressure. We'll see how they could handle it. If anything, I mean, this group of seniors can handle it, but it is a lot to put on 11 players. I will just say that. And so we'll see what happens for Florida Memorial. I think the best thing for them is to hopefully find some stability and a coach. that could keep them more accountable than last year and keep them locked in as well going into this 2025 campaign. So I feel like I've been really negative on this whole segment, but I am just kind of telling how it is. If I'm wrong, and please, hopefully I am, then I'm wrong. So we'll see what happens. Moving on, let's go ahead and talk about Weber here. Last season had a pretty solid year, I would say. Considering what they lost, they definitely overachieved here, and they actually slightly improved. They went 11-9, which is one game better than last season, but they did play one more game this year. But even then, I still think it is a pretty great accomplishment considering they lost key players like Caleb Burrows, who was an MVP candidate, and Raja Robinson, who was I want to say DPOY candidate and best linebacker of the year finalist. And so to overcome those losses and, still have a decent season, a winning season is still, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Now, the season didn't start out great. It started out with the 51-6 loss to Thomas, then a closer 0-13 loss to St. Thomas, but then they kind of went on a roll, beat Florida Memorial 30-18, Reinhardt 19-12, lost to Florida Gateway, which would end up being the junior college champs, only 0-12, which is not that bad. They would then beat Point 28-24. They would beat them again 47-6. Fort Lauderdale 61-0. They would almost beat St. Thomas 25-18. Really hung in that game there, but St. Thomas would come out just barely on top. That was almost a big upset right there for them. Then they beat Life 21-19, Reinhardt 19-7. Lost another close one, a potential upset win here, 12-14, before beating Campbellsville by a lot, 34-6, and then losing to Kaiser 40-13. Now, in the Sun Conference tournament, this is where things really got interesting because they played St. Thomas here in their first game, and they will get a massive overtime win, 33-27, to eliminate them from the Sun Conference tournament. So that was huge for them. And then they lost to Kaiser 40-18, which isn't even that bad of a game considering Kaiser beat a lot of other teams by worse. But to knock off St. Thomas is probably the accomplishment of the season, one of their crown jewels from last season. Now, in the NAIA National Tournament, they didn't play bad either. They kept it rolling. Beat Milligan, dominated them 34-6. Then they played Warner and just barely lost 12-13. That would be good enough to put them in the gold bracket where they would play Warner again. And once again, only lost 14-0. And that was a pretty close game throughout the whole thing. And so Weber only got stronger as the year went on here. And they were definitely playing above where we expected them to be. And plus, considering they have kind of a smaller roster as well, they were doing what they could. And you gotta love that. Just watching a team get out there, battle, and do their job. So there you go. But let's go ahead and talk about some players we recognize. There weren't any from, I believe, last season, but the year before, Caitlin Sigmundy was somebody we had on our all-freshman team as a DB, and then I believe she might have made a push for all-PMC. She might have been just outside, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. Now, looking at players that were recognized by the conference, Sam Wilson, their starting quarterback, was an all-conference quarterback back in 2023. But last season, Sammy Gonzalez, all-conference second-team blocker. Caitlin Sigmundy, all-conference second-team wide receiver and safety. And then Cheyenne Duran was an all-conference DB. Other key players to keep an eye on: Emma Balaco, great athlete for them over there. She is somebody that you could pretty much plug in anywhere. And then you also have the 5'10" senior wide receiver Riley Bolser, who has really emerged. Last season she really emerged as one of their top targets, just a jump ball specialist over there, and it's just somebody that's going to attract a lot of attention, which is good considering you have good receivers like Sigmundy and Durand who will take advantage of those one-on-one opportunities. And if Bolser is getting a one-on-one opportunity, she could go up and get it. For sure. And, she is somebody who is entering, I think, her second year officially of flag football. So there you go there. The sky's the limit with her. And so she could be due for a breakout season here, a huge season here in 2025. Now, looking at all the players they lost a couple players to graduation, like Sammy Gonzalez, Faith Cullen Cooper, but they do lose players like Jasmine Henry Flash, who was big time. She has transferred out, I believe, to a junior college, so there you go there. They lose Zoe Mello, who also graduated. Abigail Jordan is no longer on the roster, as well as Gabby Franzosi, Kaylee Wine, Savannah Jolman has transferred, and then Leah Bailey is no longer on the roster. So a couple players they lost, but they did bring in a pretty solid amount of freshmen. I mean, more than the year before, which is not always something they do. I mean, this is a team that likes to look at the university, at some of the athletes, and maybe poach some soccer players, basketball players. That could still be done, honestly, still. Going into this next season, we'll see what happens there. I know the roster updated, 2 weeks ago I took notes, and then a couple weeks later it's different now, so we'll just have to see what happens there. But let's talk about the freshmen that they are bringing in here, starting with Emily Cruz from Apopka High School in Florida here. That is a fine program, one of the best programs, I would probably say, in the entire country. Plenty of great college players have came from that program over there. They also bring in Caitlin Gator, I want to say, from Miami, Florida, Calvary Christian Academy. Ziona Shingles, and excuse me if I'm saying that wrong, it might be Ziona Shingles, but wide receiver linebacker, she is a freshman that will be joining this roster. Chloe Price from St. Petersburg, Florida, Zephyr Hills High School, she will be joining as well. And then I believe this player that I'm about to talk about next might be a big impact player for them, will probably be a big impact player for them, and excuse me if I'm saying this wrong, but I believe it's Ajiana Edwards. I can't tell if that is an I or an L. I'm going to be honest with you. But Edwards here from Lacanto High School in Florida, another great program over there. And I actually got to look at a little bit of her film. She's an explosive athlete who's got some burners here, and she kind of adds another big, just speed threat out there for Weber, which is something they needed, especially with Jasmine Henry leaving. But she's going to play wide receiver and corner. I think she could be a potential newcomer of the year winner. Not just finalist, but winner. That's how high I am on her. And that's a pretty big get for Weber, honestly. And to add to this very experienced squad that is featuring Sam Wilson, who's now a senior, Caitlin Sigmundy, and Emma Balacco coming back, Riley Bolser, who's a senior as well, and Cheyenne Duran too. They got some experience over there, adding some young talent that goes a long way. Right now, they have 13 players, which is not the most, and, they might recruit a couple more, who knows, right? But it is a good group of 13 here that can compete in the Sun Conference. Has a great coach in Jeff Molesky, who will be back, and I thought has been doing an excellent job with them. But, really put on a master class last season working with what he had. And I think going into this year, you're really just improving on what you have, right? And so I think this team's going to be really exciting. I like Sam Wilson a lot. I like their skill players. I think this defense, they'll figure it out as the season goes on. So we'll just have to see what happens there. But I think they have a solid enough roster here to, upset some teams again, potentially. Right now, they're number 8 in our preseason rankings, and they're there because of the players they have and the coach that they have. Just plain and simple. Even though they don't have the most players, this is a winning program. You got to keep that in mind. And so let's look at their schedule here going into this season. To start, they go ahead and play Life. I think that'll be a close game. I know Life, today they lost by a lot to Thomas, But I think that's a team that has improved on their depth. And, I think this game against Weber will be a pretty close game. Still winnable, though, for sure. Then they play Florida Memorial, a team that also doesn't have a lot of players, but we obviously have significantly less confidence in that program. I mean, we could always be proven wrong, right? But that's probably a winnable game. Then they play Siena Heights. That is a program that is slightly deeper than them, but less experience for sure. Following that, they play Atlantis, Pasco, Daytona, so a couple of junior college non-NAIA teams, as well as UCF's club team, I assume, and then Tampa, North Carolina Central. So a lot of non-NAIA teams, which I think could really help them a lot, considering these teams, all except for UCF, pretty much, are more inexperienced than them, so that does favor them, I would say. But then they play St. Thomas on March 19th. Tough game right there. I don't know if they win. Following that, they play Reinhardt. They have a new head coach over there. That could be a winnable game, even though they're deeper than them right now. I still think that could be winnable. Then they play Thomas. Tough game, especially seeing what Thomas did to Life today. Thomas looked really good, is all I'm saying. Then they play Point, I think this will be a closer game than it has been in the past, I want to say. But, they're deeper. They're better than they were last year, I think. So that should be a fun game. Could go either way. And then they play Kaiser and Warner. Tough games there. I'm not, saying that they're not going to be able to do stuff in those games, but definitely some tough matchups for sure. A lot of talent and depth over there between both those teams, and Warner we'll be talking about later. So with all that being said, I do think Weber can have a winning record this year. I think they'll be kind of a sleeper program. I guess not anymore because we're talking about them right now, but you look at this roster, they got a quarterback. And I think super underrated quarterback, by the way. She's been great all the years that we've been able to cover her. I think this is our 4th year covering her, and it's going to be sad to see her go, but this will be her swan song here. You got some great skill players, experienced skill players, Sigmundy, Blanco, Duran, love that. And then you got a couple, rooks over here in Cruz, Edwards, Price, Shingles. That could be very interesting as well. And then you can never, you also have Riley Bolster. My bad. I keep forgetting to mention her. But, she's kind of a vet, kind of a newer player, right? But definitely somebody who could be due for a breakout season and be one of the best wide receivers in the entire country. And so, got a lot of talent over there for Weber. Now, we just got to see how healthy they could stay throughout this whole season, right? Because they only have 13 players. Not as deep as before, for sure, right? Can't do as much, at least as much defensively. Offensively, I think you have a lot of options. But defensively, you're in a more interesting spot, for sure. And so we'll just have to see what happens there. But offensively, they could score with some of the best. And so we'll just have to see what happens for Weber. Let me just look at their past history here. I think they've won. The last time they did not win 10 games was 2022, where they went 8-10. A lot of close games in that season, though, just being honest. And then ever since then, 2023, they were 10-9. 2024, they were 11-9. This season, I kind of feel like they could get, maybe not way over 11-9, but they could approach that number again, 10-11 wins, at least a winning record. You really can't count out this team who has great coaching, great skill players, a lot of experience. They got chemistry together. It'll be fun to see what they do here against some of these newer teams, because I do think they match up pretty well. But with all that being said, they just got to play ball, and we'll see what happens in 25. It should be a fun season for Weber, though. Moving on to our last, but definitely not least team here, we are going to go ahead and talk about a contender. Number 4, according to our preseason rankings, Warner. Let's talk about him. Let's talk about last season first. So they went 17-3, which is a massive improvement compared to last year's or the year before's record in 2023 of 10-9. And this also marks the third straight year that their win total has went up. So they've only gotten better over the last 3 years here, and that's with losing the players that they have had over these years. And so that's a testament to the coaching and as well as the core that started there 3 years ago. But let's go ahead and talk about what actually happened. They would start the season on a 15-game hot streak, including wins over Thomas, St. Thomas, Cablesville, and Weber. They would then fall to Kaiser 12-26 at the very end of the season. In the conference tournament, though, they would suffer an early exit to Thomas 0-26 in the semis. So a rough end of the season, end of the regular season, I should say, in Sun Conference play. But in the NAIA tournament, they would kind of figure it out. They would start Kayla Ludwig at quarterback, and she would go ahead and get them going with a beating of Milligan 21-6. They would then beat Weber twice here, 13-12, and then 14-0 in the gold bracket to advance to the semis. And then they would fall to the eventual champs in Ottawa, 13-21, being one of the few teams to play them the closest, arguably one of the teams to play them the closest in the entire country. And so that should tell you a lot about where they are at. For them to have a quarterback change, which was the right quarterback change, and still improve and get better, says a lot about where this team is, and a lot of that squad will be returning for this year, and so that's where things get exciting. But let's talk about all the players and people that were recognized by us on that Warner team, starting with their star athlete, wide receiver, Anna Vincenzini. She was an all-PMC wide receiver last season, as well as the winner of our Best Wide Receiver Award. But most importantly, she was our 2024 Most Valuable Playmaker, the first ever non-quarterback to win it. And it was well-deserved with what she was doing on both sides of the ball, really. But at wide receiver, she was dominant with, some could argue, a little bit of a carousel of quarterbacks over there. In addition, Tim Mims, he was a Coach of the Year finalist. He was definitely somebody who got votes and was in consideration, but it was a pretty strong group last season. He also had a couple other great players in Talisha Perry, who was a 2024 Newcomer of the Year finalist, and a Best Rusher finalist. She'll be coming back looking to improve on a great first season. And then they also bring back Adriana Williams, who was an all-freshman team utility player. She has some serious speed coming from the powerhouse that is Robinson High School. Last season as a freshman really made her mark, and I think going into this season she could also have a little bit of a breakout year here. I mean, this wideout group is stacked. Now, talking about all conference players, recognitions in general, Anna Vincenzini was a first team wide receiver, obviously, and their 2024 Sun Conference Player of the Year. Lauren Clark was a first-team utility defensive player, played rusher, played linebacker, kind of moved all over. We thought she'd just play rusher, but kind of settled into more of a hybrid linebacker role. She was great for them last season. We'll continue to build on to that going into this year and could be an all-PMC player, very much so. Madeline Portwood made the second team, all-conference team, as a safety. And then you also have just a bunch of other players who I feel like probably should have been recognized but did not quite get recognized here in Angeline Bunting and Jessica Finley here. Jessica Finley had a great season in her freshman year. Angeline Bunting, same thing as well. I mean, they both had their games throughout the year, and so you got a few great about that. You also have Andrea Castillo, who's a good receiver for them. You have the likes of Trinity Kieran, Nicolette DeSimone, who have always been reliable and has been a good base and core for this program. Jade Mazziata as well here. So you got a lot of great players. I think that is something that is not surprising at all. I'm sure I'm even missing some players there. But, I mean, this is a very stacked skill group. Offensively and defensively, they could pretty much match up with any skill group in the entire country. And we believe that. So, There you go there. Now, they do have a couple departures, which are tough, but it's not something that they haven't had before. Starting with those that have graduated, they lose Michaela Michael, Janaya Rodriguez, Allison Mangiati, Destiny Burrows, just to name a couple more. And then there are some players who are no longer on the roster here, like Ayana Robinson, Madeline Portwood, which is tough because she was an all-conference safety, second team. Destiny Whitmore, Kennedy Wolf, Alexa Roche as well. And then probably the biggest hit here, they lose Kayla Ludwig. She transfers to Florida Gateway. I said this on a previous episode, but we will be covering a little bit more of junior college and just women's college flag football in general in segments throughout this season. So we'll be following how she does over there. But, she was a player that played wide receiver for them first and then kind of moved over to quarterback and found a lot of success over at quarterback, and that's just kind of a tough loss because we really liked what we saw from her in the national tournament. So to be losing a player like that, especially because it's a quarterback, is tough. And so Warner will be going on to, this is like their third straight season of not knowing what to expect from the quarterback room here. It feels like third. It's probably more realistically second straight season here. But per usual, they always recruit well. They bring in a lot of players. I'm just going to name off all these players, starting with Brielle Edmonston, wide receiver DB from Steinbrenner High School, another great program in Florida. They bring in from Hamilton High School all the way in Arizona, Katarina Macagnano, I want to say, quarterback. They bring in Yermel Garcia, wide receiver DB from Braden High School, Florida. Angelina Shell, wide receiver DB from Tarpon Springs High School in Florida. And actually, it's Angelina Shell Nabiao, I want to say. I definitely feel like I'm saying that wrong. Please feel free to correct me. But there you go. Bring in Marian Torrero, a rusher from Panama. That should probably be no big surprise there. Panama, a big time flag football country, and this team is basically the Panama national team there. They bring in Maria Quinn from Staten Island, New York, wide receiver DB. Cadence Wormers, wide receiver DB from Pace High School in Florida, another great program there. Valeria Martinez, wide receiver DB from Celebration High School in Florida. Ana Murillo, another Panama player, wide receiver DB. They bring in Esther Breitling, I want to say, wide receiver DB from Palm Harbor University High School in Florida. Carson Buttram, running back linebacker from Strawberry Crest High School in Florida. Kamara Weston, DB from Hillside High School in New Jersey. And then last but not least, they bring in Lena Boljak. Lena Boljak, wide receiver DB from Celebration High School. So there you go. But I think one of their biggest pickups was also a transfer here. And that's Adriana Brustmeyer, a wide receiver linebacker transferring from Reinhardt, a junior from Panama. She actually made our all-freshman team a couple years ago. So for them to get a great player like this just adds to their defense specifically, I think. Offensively, they're going to be stacked. But defensively, adding on another linebacker, another good defensive player, that is big time. So there you go there. But looking at this freshman class, obviously, or I guess this recruiting class, obviously you got so many great players. You could definitely expect a couple of them to, slot in and do their thing as well. I also believe they bring back Jenna Marrero, who did not really get to play a whole lot last season. I think she was still recovering from injury. I could be mistaken, but she will be back as well. A great utility player for them. So they're extremely stacked, right? And so I kind of don't know if there's going to be many of these players from this recruiting class that will contribute right away. We'll see. I'm sure they'll slot in where they fit in. Adriana Brustmeyer, you got to just assume that she's going to be somebody that is going to be a player that carves out a pretty significant role on that defense. I think that goes without saying for sure here. But they only bring in one quarterback, and I do want to talk about this quarterback room first here. But Katarina Macagnano here from Chandler High School, not Chandler High School, from Hamilton high school in Chandler, Arizona here. She has a couple accolades: state champion, U.S. Army All-American, went to Elite 11 two times, all-conference quarterback. All those great things, and then got to watch her film a little bit as well. Could throw the ball extremely well with a lot of accuracy. And, just bring something different to the team quarterback-wise, as she is, a new quarterback on the roster. But they have a pretty, I would say, experienced quarterback room. I mean, they haven't got a lot of playing time, but they've got more playing time than some quarterbacks around the country. Let me just start listing them off, starting with Andre Rodriguez from Panama, now a senior. She got a lot of plays here. I mean, she's going into, I think, potentially her last year, maybe second to last year here. At this point, she knows this offense well. She could plug in and they'll win a bunch of games with her, right? So there you go there. They also bring back Katherine Hutchinson from Woodstock, Georgia here. She will be a sophomore returning. Maybe she takes a step forward after, seeing very limited play last year and takes over that job. I think that's very possible. You have Courtney Cromer from Jensen Beach. She's going to be a junior here. I mean, that's another player. We covered her, or at least did a film breakdown of her years ago, and we liked what we saw. Now going into year 3, maybe some of those things come together. She did get a little bit of playing time. We'll see. But she is also still on the roster. And technically, Jenna Marrero could also play a little bit of quarterback. But we'll leave it at that. And so it is going to be a quarterback battle between those 4 players right there. Now, that being said, I know in the past we have been a little, hesitant of calling Warner a contender because of the uncertainty at the quarterback position. But the skill level and the depth of this wide receiver group here for Warner, it almost makes it so that it doesn't matter, at least in the regular season, doesn't matter who plays quarterback for them. Now, if we're talking about contention and making a deep playoff run, I mean, you want to have a quarterback that you could at least trust a lot going into it. But that is a later problem. And even then, we saw what they're able to do starting a whole new quarterback for the national tournament there, and she brought them to the semis. So if that's the floor, then I'm sure they could figure it out over there. Tim Mims, I mean, he's made it work with multiple different quarterbacks, and their win total has only gone up. So you really can't argue with history there. Now, I mean, just saying it right now, Macognano over there, she could be an interesting player, is all I'm going to say. She could be a very interesting player if she wins that job, which is going to be tough, right? But if she wins that job and takes over and she's balling out, I mean, obviously, newcomer of the year candidate, right? But we're looking at a potential MVP candidate as well. And I mean, at the same time, even Anna Vincenzini, she's going to be defending her MVP title, and it's going to be hard to not keep her in consideration, just being honest there. Right, but if they could figure out the quarterback position, really commit to somebody, they could be in a very good spot. I think regardless, they're going to be in a great spot. Because, I mean, even then, if a quarterback goes down for any reason, right, you still have 3 other quarterbacks, or at least at the minimum 2 other quarterbacks that have a lot of experience, that have game experience too. And on top of that, I mean, you got to look at this defense. I'm just talking about the roster now. But you got to look at this defense. The DBs I like a lot. Some could say underrated because of how talented they are as receivers as well. But it is a good DB group. You add in the likes of an Adriana Brustmeyer, who, I mean, you could play 7 players on defense. Adding 1 more player that could be a standout defensive player, it goes a long way. It really does. In flag football, somebody who knows her stuff, has been around the game for a while, that's going to be huge. You bring in Lauren Clark as well. I mean, well, she's already been there. But you have Lauren Clark going into her second year in this defense. She could be a D-point candidate, just being honest there. I mean, we thought that last season as well. You bring in another rusher in Marian Torrero from Panama as well to add to your rotation, which is already anchored by a very talented rusher in Talisha Perry, one of the quickest in the entire country. I mean, this defense, not to sleep on them, they're probably a top 5 unit, top 10 unit, at the very least, top 10. But for sure top 5 potential. And then offensively, I mean, you could argue that they're top 3, if not top 1, for sure, if they could figure out that quarterback spot. So this is a very stacked team. They have a good head coach over there who's kind of figured it out. But going into this next season, it is not crazy to call them a contender. I wouldn't even call them a dark horse at this point because we know what they could do. They are a contender for the national championship. But it just comes down to seeing, how far they could go. Now, predicting the playoffs is not what we're here to do, though. We'll talk about that at a later time. Let's go ahead and look at their 2025 schedule here to start. They play this week against Life here on Friday. That's a team that has improved, but that's probably still a winnable game. Following that, they play St. Thomas the next day. Always a tough group. They have a very skilled group as well, but they do lose Holly Near and also do not have the rosters. And so I have no idea who they're going to roll out there at quarterback. And I think it's fair to say at this point, Warner's quarterback situation is probably more solidified than theirs. At least they have a bunch more experience with their quarterbacks, Warner does. And so I kind of favor Warner in that one, but that's still a tough game. And then later, following that, 5 days later, they play Kaiser, which is always going to be tough. It'll be interesting to see how they stack up with Kaiser, to say the least. So there you go. So kind of a tough stretch here. I mean, St. Thomas and Kaiser, right off the bat, within a week to play. We'll see what they're made of pretty soon here. Following that, they play Siena Heights, a new program. Then they play Atlantis, Florida Memorial, Daytona, Pasco, North Carolina Central, University of Tampa. All games that they should probably win by a pretty decent amount, I would say. Nothing against Siena Heights, but they are a first-year program. They could probably challenge them the most out of this group here. But they should probably win those. I'd be surprised if they didn't. Then they play Reinhardt, Alabama State, Point. All teams they should probably beat. Reinhardt and Point did get better, though, but I would still favor them there. Then they play Thomas in Georgia. That's going to be a fun one, April 5th, Saturday. That should be a very good game. We'll see where they're at there. Then they play Weber, and then they have their Sun Conference Championship tournament here. So I'm just looking through this real quick. I don't think they play any Sun Conference opponents more than once. But, I mean, you look at the players, the teams that they are playing and the players. They start with, this is going by our preseason rankings. They start with number 6, St. Thomas, followed by number 2, Kaiser. That's a direct way to move up, by the way. Then they have a stretch of games where they should gain some confidence, maybe get some other players in there and whatnot, get some freshmen in there, some good experience. That's never a bad thing. And then on April 5th, they play number 3, Thomas. Then they play number 8, Weber. And then they have their Sun Conference Championship tournament where they're probably going to play at least 2 top 10 teams, if not 3 top 10 teams, to make it, to the Sun Conference Championship, which I would consider them a favorite to make it there, honestly, or one of the favorites to make it there. So, with all that being said, some tough games to start. I don't think Warner's ever going to drop out of our top 10 for us. Top 5, maybe they're just outside. Say they lose to a St. Thomas and Kaiser, and then, they just don't really play a top 5 team until Thomas, right? Sure, I could give you that. But even then, we know how talented this group is. This is a team that I would say will for sure have a winning record. I don't think that's anything to, be surprised about. Can they top 17 wins? I feel like they have less than 17 games here. Let me count this up actually real quick. 16 games is what I count, regular season games, that is, and then that's not including tournament play, which is the Sun Conference and national tournament. So I think there is a chance to go over 17 games. 17 is a lot of wins. You could probably still expect them to be above that 15 win mark for sure here. But, this Warner team is absolutely stacked. Right now, we have them at 4. They're behind Thomas, who has an established... they're behind 3 teams who have established quarterbacks. I'll just say that. Ottawa, they have Carrera. Kaiser, maybe not as established, but They have played Haley Young a lot. Valentina over there as well has played a lot. Finetti, that is, played a lot in her freshman year, I felt. And then, I mean, you know, they're like Warner, where they have an experienced group here. I would say that group of quarterbacks had a little bit more success in their playing time than this experienced group of quarterbacks. So there you go. But that's still going to be a tough team. I mean, they're built very well with a lot of great skill players over there. Then you have Thomas, obviously, with Alexa Wilson. And then you have Warner sitting right here at 4. That 1 through 4 is a lot closer than it looks. Our top 4 will probably look like a combination of this top 4 here for the whole season. I wouldn't be shocked if that's what it was, right? That's just where these programs are right now. So we'll see what happens here. But for Warner, don't get it twisted. This is definitely a year they could win a championship. I would consider this part of their championship window. Once more, it comes down to how good can these quarterbacks play, right? But I also think this defense is going to be better. It may not just come down to the quarterback here. The defense, if they could take another step forward and be a tier better, it just might not matter if you just have a better roster, which is what they've built over there. So we'll see what happens. Regardless, this will be an extremely exciting team to watch here. Like I said, sitting at 4, but they could contend with any of these other teams here. But that is a question and a story to talk about later on in the season. For now, this 2025 campaign and regular season should be a fun one for them. Alright, but that'll do it for this episode of the Playmakers Corner podcast here. We have talked about 20 flag football teams. There are only 2 that we have not talked about, and it is because we have not received any roster updates. If we do, we'll try to put out a season preview, but if not, we're just going to go ahead and hop into our week 1 recap, which will happen next week here. A lot of great games going on this week. Super excited to get back into it and cover it. I said this on the last episode, but I'll say it on this one. We will also be doing a segment talking about just women's college flag football in general from non-NAIA teams. Not focusing as much on club teams, but, you know, teams that offer scholarships for the sport. We're looking at a D3 conference in Atlantic, I want to say. And then you also have a bunch of junior colleges as well, which, I mean, you know, we can't watch every single game, mostly because not every single game is being streamed. If we could, then we'd be talking about it in more detail, but we'll do our best to cover those. And so we're really excited about this season. Should be our biggest one yet. We just want to make sure we cover as much of women's college flag football as we can. But to stay, I guess, in touch with us, go ahead and show some love on social media. Follow us there at Playmakers Corner on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter /X. And, you know, let us know who's going to win it all this season. It'll be really fun to see what happens going into this 2025 campaign here. It should be a great season. We are super excited. But until then, until next time, we'll catch you later.